No one here advocates for another to go to war with Trump or the United States. That would not help. Indeed, that would be common nonsense. And yet, there are many other ways a relevant person or nation may legitimately seek to help address what is going on right now. But that firm realization by everyone that the World War path might indeed be the direction towards which we are all now headed. The joint holding together to demand a return of the international system to a true rules-based order, and a universal denial of America's foundations and bases for carrying out this adventure, as the UK so admirably just recently did on grounds of its legality, would be a good first step. People should wake up to the reality of what we are facing today, and what might eventually follow somewhere down the line, and frown at US adventurism, which may only lead to unnecessarily heightening irritation among nations and powers, and goading them eventually towards a conflict most have so strenuously been aiming to avoid for decades now. We must also remember, Greenland is not safe for all the hope we may have, or the prayers we could say. Canada too is not safe, and the rest of the world could end up being held hostage by just a country or two. I remember President Trump's first term. It was all just about China, China, China. It was just line after line of diplomatic and economic attack on China, especially with the trade ban, pressures on steel, vehicles, etc., and the TikTok saga. China survived and even managed to push back quite hard on certain fronts. Now, in his second term, superficially, he appears to have moved on to some other matters. But he never forgives, he never forgets. Still, this second term, despite all of the sanctions against Iran and threats at other countries to dissuade purchase of Iranian oil and products and other business with Tehran, Beijing has continued quietly, stubbornly, and almost obliviously buying off much more substantial quantities of oil and expanding business and other cooperation with Tehran without allowing such external pressure to constitute a proper barrier. That policy decision has been a very big boon to Chinese economy, and Trump doesn't like that. So in his mind, he probably knows, I cannot get you militarily to suffer and collapse, because you also possess the great nuclear weapons, and your economy is quite formidable, which I don't like, and I cannot get you through sanctions or tariff threats, as I can so easily get others through. Yet there are still other ways to catch a rat. This war imposed on Iran has been brewing for decades, and not only with the US, but also with Israel. America had felt humiliated and driven out of Iran, which it had apparently been over-exploiting for decades against interests of the country's own people. Under the government of the Shah, they had once even orchestrated a regime change in Iran against the people's choice after a validly elected, legitimate leader had emerged for the country, whom the Americans did not like. So, at the 1979 Islamic Revolution, America felt humiliated when diplomats were held hostage in Iran for 444 days. That became a major geopolitical nightmare in American government psyche. They never forgot, they never forgave. Tranches of ever-worsening forms of sanctions were rolled out against Iran in subsequent years to cause pain, completely hobble the economy, and force regime collapse. But they never worked. Instead, regime continued to grow stronger and ever stronger, even when protests and violence were apparently provoked by foreign agents. Authorities were able to beat them back. When their oil exports were terribly sanctioned, they found a way around it. As for Israel, it probably had also been enjoying a boom in relations in those days of American exploitation with the Western-leaning Shah. So when the Shah was removed, it too would have lost a great deal. Worse, the new administration proved to be no nonsense and made it quite clear from the outset it was no longer business as usual. And they kept true to that for 47 years. They proved anti-Zionist, not least as a result of the ill treatment and atrocities meted out by Israel against the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Most Arab countries cowered before Israel, But Iran always remained steadfast in focus and condemnation of extremist Israeli actions, and they remained uncompromising in principle. Add to that the fact that Iran wasn't buckling under US sanctions and Israeli sabotage activities, but was actually moving forward, although appreciably slowly, and modernizing, even to the point of strategic peaceful nuclear technology, with crucial applications in energy and medicine. Iran was not becoming a failed state, but indeed emerged as a strategic center around the Middle East, with moral, political, diplomatic, and regional clout. Iran also was developing some very effective strategic defensive technologies, many locally sourced and made, such as the very cheap and effective drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and even some of the most vaunted hypersonic missile systems available today. Israel faced the grim prospect. Iran, a hostile state, but no pushover. Like many other states across the Middle East, what could be more threatening for Israel and Israeli expansionism in the region than that? So for Israel, Iran constituted the ultimate competitor or existential threat, which had to be removed entirely from the scene. Otherwise, it could never hope to overrun the Middle East, as it had always dreamt of. So Israel has been sporting to do this attack against Iran for decades. It has always been more about domination and control, much like what America has been parading around the world. And Israel, a newcomer to this, were it to start and succeed in the Middle East, it might also begin to extend tentacles of that much farther across the world. That is the trajectory, and that is more or less the rationale for Israel's behavior, which, incidentally, still comes back to haunt the rest of the world. Israel is not a great power now. Look how it treats the rest of the world. For the US, however, the immediate motive is more varied and complex. First, it would like to avenge, pay back for that perceived Islamic Republic humiliation all those 47 years ago. Second, it would support a strategic ally. In a vicious war, the ally probably would emphatically lose, were it to be allowed to fight one-on-one. Third, with the dominance of Israel in the Middle East, all of it would simply become Washington's back lawn. Fourth, Trump is very much invested in the disruption, even destruction and control of Iran, as a way to strangulate China economically and more. Despite the sanctions against Iran, China still buys up to 80% of Iran's well-subsidized oil without compunction. Any takeover of Iran could see China lose such proximate, easy and strategic partner and energy source, severely impacting the economy and further growth. And that could merely have been just one step in perhaps a long series to increasingly commandeer and isolate China from its sources of energy, as we yet saw happen with Venezuela, a China partner energy source, a BRICS Plus partner and potential member. Fifth, Iran is a BRICS Plus country. Taking over control of Iran could be a ruse at effectively putting a knife into the very heart of BRICS Plus and effectively reversing Iran's membership. Trump has already made clear his distaste for BRICS Plus and has vowed to tear it apart. Thus, the Iran attack could be much more than just a simple move. For Trump, this might not even be mainly about Iran itself. It could actually be a vengeful lashing out against BRICS Plus, killing many birds just with one stone. And most importantly, China, whom he regards as the United States' most strategic competitor and so adversary. Unfortunately, most countries around the world, and especially Europe, seem to be taking this incident relatively lightly. Even they who know what it means to cause and fight the world wars, and seem not to be able to connect the dots and see the pattern in Donald Trump's behavior. They might imagine that this is just a localized affair, having nothing to do with them, or that this may actually be serving their own interests. And they may be all wrong, except they be comfortable by the time the US has eventually overrun their territories and de facto owned them, and then begins disposing of them individually as they deem fit. then the US might, as is already happening now across the United States of America, decide that, no, we don't like the Spaniards. They look too much like the South Americans. Or we don't like the French. They are too much like the Spaniards. Or are too philosophical and freedom-aligned, and might be an upset risk to the great United States project, and so expel them from the Greater America project. Same for many others within the European community. Only the most appropriate might be allowed into the United States fold or the new American world order. They should not make the mistake to think that this is just a Trump one-off, because usually there is hardly ever such a thing as a Trump one-off. And with a precedent set, it would leave a concrete reality on the ground, a launch pad for any other Trump coming into the White House or other associated American political expansionist visionaries later to spring from. We remember how Trump went on all about China during his first term and could not get all he desired. Second term, he decided to change tack. Start off with the smaller countries. Now he is effectively coming back full circle for China through Venezuela before, and through Iran now. During his first term, Trump had also brought up interest around Canada and Greenland, but they eventually came to naught. Come now second term, he has most openly and actively revived interest on both topics. Canada is a very large and much more capable country, so for approach, he had ruled out military takeover right from the start, partly in order to rub Canada soft into complacency. By the time he will have been ready to strike, that will be another matter, even if it were to turn out not military. By the time Trump's America might have acquired much of the rest of the world's energy and strategic location points, then he could just simply squeeze Canada economically, etc., until surrender to status as America's 51st state. With regard to Greenland, small and Denmark held, Denmark being a very small and almost militarily inconsequential country compared to the US. From the beginning, Trump widely kept the option of military action open, only walking back that track when he felt the overwhelmingly unfavorable reaction of the vast majority of other NATO members. He had come on board with quite a lot on his agenda. Starting with Russia, he had paused. That conflict proved too thick. He went over to Iran, received a blow, and withdrew slightly. Next he tried Canada, cajoling and making all sorts of statements and performing stunts. Not one seemed to work, so he left that theater. Came onto Greenland. He did everything he could. He talked soft, he talked negotiations, he talked military force and takeover. He talked economic and trade tariffs until ultimate surrender. He did virtually everything he could, but it did not work. So he veered off down towards Venezuela. Venezuela is a small, weak country, at least militarily. He reckoned he might as well restart from there. He didn't go back to Iran directly. The Venezuela operation was supposed to scare Iran into quick submission, but it did not. So he brought down his vast naval armada and military might upon the Gulf. He has since initiated a devastating attack against Iran, in company with regional ally Israel, in order to bring about a regime change and cause an absolute weakening of Iran as a major state in the Middle East. War plausibly, effectively, also strongly aimed at China. It'd be quite wonderful to behold anyone willing to vouch that were Trump to come out clearly successful from his Iran adventure, he would not immediately go into overdrive, cynically using world's oil control leverage to try and deprive and torment China, even Europe, to give in to Greenland. And when he might have acquired Greenland, that he, bounding Canada from two sides, would not seek to squeeze her in any manner possible, trade sanctions, tariffs, etc., until, reaching breaking point, Canada might simply surrender under the weight of overwhelming pressure. So if China just decide to sit this one out, they might just be making a very big mistake. Europe too, if they and many others more intimately intertwined with recent tough geopolitical events, just decide they might just stand aside here. In the distinct mannerism of Saul the Witness, there is no gainsaying when it will eventually come around to being the day of the jackal. If you enjoy listening to alternative sources and new perspectives to world affairs, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, and leave your comments below.